Welcome to Global Watch. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a landmark and highly anticipated decision, the Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's sweeping tariffs, sending shockwaves through the political and economic landscape of the United States. The ruling, which comes after months of legal battles and intense public debate, is being hailed as one of the most significant interventions by the judiciary in recent trade history. The justices determined that the tariffs represented an overreach of executive authority, arguing that the president had exceeded the powers granted by the Constitution and by Congress. Legal experts say this decision sets a powerful precedent, clarifying the limits of presidential power in matters of international trade. This marks a major shift in the balance of power between the branches of government, reaffirming Congress's constitutional role in shaping and overseeing U.S. trade policy. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are now re-examining their responsibilities, as the ruling reasserts the legislative branch's authority over tariffs and trade agreements. The Supreme Court's decision effectively dismantles a core part of the America First doctrine, which relied heavily on unilateral executive action to impose tariffs and reshape global trade relationships. It also challenges the use of national emergency powers as a tool for economic policy, raising questions about how future presidents might respond to global economic threats. For American businesses, the impact is immediate and profound. Companies that paid billions in tariffs over the past several years could now see over $100 billion in refunds, injecting much-needed capital into the economy. However, this sudden influx of funds also creates a significant fiscal challenge for the federal government, which must now find ways to address the unexpected shortfall. The loss of $200 billion in annual revenue from tariffs forces both corporations and the federal government to rethink their strategies. Businesses are already reassessing their supply chains and global partnerships, while policymakers in Washington are scrambling to fill the budget gap and reconsider the nation's approach to international trade. In their majority opinion, the justices drew a clear and unmistakable line. Only Congress has the constitutional authority to levy tariffs and regulate foreign commerce. This decision not only redefines the boundaries of executive power, but also re-establishes the foundational principles of checks and balances in American government. Now, all eyes turn to Capitol Hill, where lawmakers face the daunting task of charting the future of American trade policy. As Congress debates new legislation and trade frameworks, the world watches closely, knowing that the decisions made here will shape the global economy for years to come. At the heart of this case is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, a 1977 law meant for targeted sanctions during foreign crises. The Trump administration used IEEPA to justify broad tariffs, arguing trade deficits threaten national security. Critics said this stretched the law far beyond its intent, bypassing Congress's explicit constitutional powers over trade. Lawsuits from thousands of companies challenged the tariffs, leading to a patchwork of lower court rulings. The Senate tried to end the emergency declaration, but the House did not act, leaving the Supreme Court to decide. During oral arguments, justices questioned the administration's claim to nearly unlimited authority. President Trump's America First trade strategy marked a dramatic shift in U.S. economic policy, placing tariffs at the center of his administration's efforts to protect American industries and jobs. Trump argued that for too long, the U.S. had been taken advantage of by trading partners, and the bold action was needed to restore fairness and strength to the American economy. Tariffs, he insisted, would serve as both a shield for domestic manufacturers and a bargaining chip to force other countries to the negotiating table. The administration imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of imports, with a particular focus on goods from China. This aggressive approach triggered a global trade war, as other countries retaliated with their own tariffs on American products. The resulting standoff sent shockwaves through international markets and upended long-standing trade relationships. Trump and his advisors claimed that persistent trade deficits represented a national emergency, threatening American prosperity and security. This argument was used to justify taking unilateral action, bypassing traditional multilateral negotiations and international trade organizations. While tariffs did lead to a reduction in some categories of imports, the overall U.S. trade deficit remained stubbornly high. Global supply chains quickly adapted, with companies rerouting goods through other countries or shifting production to avoid tariffs, blunting the intended impact. The revenue collected from tariffs was used to fund government programs, most notably a $12 billion aid package for American farmers. Many farmers had been hit hard by retaliatory tariffs, especially on crops like soybeans, and the aid was intended to offset their losses and stabilize rural economies. However, the burden of tariffs was largely shouldered by American consumers and businesses, who faced higher prices on everyday goods, increased costs for manufacturing inputs, and uncertainty about future trade policy. Small businesses in particular struggled to absorb these new expenses. The policy sent ripples through the global economy, disrupting established trade flows and sparking heated debate among economists, business leaders, and policymakers. While some credited the tariffs with bringing attention to unfair trade practices, others questioned whether the costs outweighed the benefits and whether the strategy truly reshaped the U.S. economy. Throughout his presidency, Trump maintained that tariffs were being paid by foreign countries, framing them as a win for the U.S. But most economists disagreed, pointing out that the costs were passed on to American importers and consumers, not foreign governments. Now, with the Supreme Court's decision, the legal foundation of this tariff strategy faces a fundamental reassessment. The ruling could reshape how future administrations approach trade policy, and its impact will be closely watched by businesses, workers, and trading partners around the world. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 that IEEPA does not allow the president to impose broad, lasting tariffs to fix trade imbalances. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that Congress intended IEEPA for targeted sanctions, not sweeping trade policy changes. The decision invalidates the National Emergency Declaration and the tariffs, focusing strictly on legal authority, not policy wisdom. Companies can now seek refunds, potentially costing the Treasury over $100 billion. The loss of $200 billion in annual revenue is a major fiscal blow. Dissenting justices argued for more executive flexibility, but the majority prioritized the separation of powers. The ruling reasserts Congress's exclusive authority over trade. The decision could lower prices for consumers by removing tariffs that raised costs on everyday goods. Importing businesses stand to benefit from refunds and reduced expenses, while protected industries face renewed foreign competition. The loss of tariff revenue leaves a $200 billion gap in the federal budget, forcing tough fiscal choices. Congress must now craft new trade laws, but political gridlock could delay action and create uncertainty for businesses. The administration will have to rely on more targeted, slower trade tools. The ruling demands a more nuanced, multilateral approach to trade negotiations. The economic landscape is shifting, and the next steps are up to lawmakers. American farmers have suffered the brunt of the ongoing trade war, bearing heavy losses as key export markets have dried up almost overnight. For generations, these markets provided a reliable source of income, but now, uncertainty hangs over the heartland. Retaliatory tariffs imposed by foreign governments have cost American agriculture billions of dollars, leaving warehouses filled with unsold grain and crops that once would have shipped overseas. In response, the government stepped in with aid packages funded by tariff revenue, offering temporary relief to struggling farmers. These payments helped some families keep their farms afloat, at least for a while, but these measures were never meant to be a permanent solution. Many farmers worry about what happens when the aid runs out, and whether their livelihoods can survive in the long term. Now, with the Supreme Court's recent decision, there is hope that foreign tariffs could be lifted, potentially opening the door for American products to re-enter global markets. If these tariffs are removed, U.S. agriculture could once again find buyers abroad, helping to restore the vital trade relationships that farmers depend on. However, the end of tariff revenue also means that future government aid programs are at risk, leaving many farmers anxious about how they'll weather the next storm. Without a safety net, some families may be forced to sell their land or face foreclosure, deepening the crisis in rural communities already struggling to survive. Rebuilding trust and trade relationships with international partners will require patience, negotiation, and a renewed commitment to diplomacy from all sides. Across the country, farmers are watching and waiting, hoping for renewed access to global markets and a return to stability, but the future remains uncertain. Congress and the administration now face mounting pressure to support the agricultural sector through this difficult transition, as rural voices demand action and reassurance. The path to recovery for rural America is still uncertain, but the resilience of its farmers and the support of the nation will be crucial in shaping what comes next. The Supreme Court's ruling is being welcomed by many U.S. allies as a return to predictable, rules-based trade. European leaders see an opportunity to renegotiate and remove trade barriers, easing transatlantic tensions. In China, the decision weakens the U.S. president's leverage, but leaves core disputes unresolved. Other nations are adjusting their trade strategies in response, with ongoing negotiations now facing new dynamics. The world is watching how Congress will shape future U.S. trade commitments. The era of unilateral executive action is ending, replaced by a demand for broader consensus. The ruling signals a shift toward stability and cooperation in global trade. International partners are recalibrating, awaiting the next chapter in U.S. policy. Experts agree the ruling restores congressional authority, but the path forward is uncertain. The administration must now use more limited trade tools, while Congress faces pressure to act quickly. Legal scholars praise the decision as a check on presidential power and a reinforcement of the separation of powers. Economists predict lower prices and business investment, but warn of disruption for protected industries and a fiscal shock from tariff refunds. The Senate has shown willingness to challenge executive overreach. Now, the House must engage. Lawmakers will debate whether to grant the president new, limited tariff powers or reclaim full control. The future of U.S. trade policy now rests with Congress. This Supreme Court decision is a turning point for American trade policy and democracy. It returns responsibility to Congress and invites a national conversation about economic priorities. The ruling affects every American, consumers, workers, and businesses alike. The challenge now is to manage the transition, support affected industries, and rebuild international trust. Citizens must stay informed and engaged, making their voices heard in shaping future policy. The story of trade is about connection, how we relate to each other and the world. This is a rare chance to choose a new path for prosperity and stability. The conversation is just beginning, and every voice matters.